Good morning, and welcome to the Stylo News Intelligence Update. Today is the 3rd of August, 2026, and we're looking at your Asia Situation Report. Over the next few minutes, we're going to take a calm, objective look at the geopolitical landscape across the Asian continent, examining the facts as they stand. But first, a quick note that this explainer is brought to you by ProWave AI. They're the developers behind Stylo Intel, which is an AI-powered open-source intelligence program, and Stylo News, the commercial version you can access right now on the web or through their mobile apps. All right, let's get right into our intelligence estimates for the region. In today's briefing, we'll be doing a 2-week look back at the primary events and decision-maker perspectives across 4 critical theaters. We'll cover China and Taiwan dynamics, the Korean Peninsula, South Asia flashpoints, and Southeast Asia stability, before wrapping things up with a strategic outlook.
Starting off with Section 1, China and Taiwan Dynamics, Coercion and Rehearsal.
Over the past 2 weeks, intelligence reporting shows a very persistent pattern of militarized pressure from the People's Liberation Army. We're tracking multiple instances of aircraft crossing the median line into the northern and eastern air defense zones, and this is happening alongside some pretty large-scale encirclement and live-fire-style drills in the Taiwan Strait.
So, what does this actually mean for the near future? Well, the intelligence consensus right now is that the probability of an immediate, full-scale invasion remains very low. Decision-makers are instead leaning heavily into alternative options. We're seeing high chatter around blockades, maritime quarantines, and cyber operations. It's a clear strategy of normalizing military presence and applying coercive pressure, rather than gearing up for an outright cross-strait landing.
Moving on to Section 2. The Korean Peninsula, Strategic Opportunism.
When we look at the disposition of forces across North and South Korea right now, the most important intelligence indicator is actually what we aren't seeing. There are absolutely no verified mobilization surges, no major shifts in artillery, and no unusual tactical incidents along the demilitarized zone. We're also not seeing any of those official warning posture changes that would typically precede a direct offensive.
But here is where it gets interesting. While there's zero credible reporting of preparations for an attack on the peninsula itself, open-source intelligence and analyst discussions are heavily focused on external actions. Specifically, we're looking at North Korea's material support to Russia in the Ukraine conflict. The immediate concern here revolves around strategic opportunism and long-term risk, rather than a localized war. To sum up our medium confidence assessment, current intent appears oriented toward coercion, deterrence, and strategic opportunism. So, while the baseline danger of limited provocations is always a factor, initiating a full-scale peninsular conflict simply does not seem to be Pyongyang's current strategic objective. Next up, Section 3, South Asia Flashpoints, Militarized Deterrence.
This is a deeply complex geographic area where border tensions significantly overlap. Right now, the threat of a major interstate war between India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and China is assessed as low. However, the risk for localized escalation is elevated. We're keeping a very close eye on the potential for limited friction between India and Pakistan, as well as localized clashes right along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. Looking at the specific relationships between these states, a key indicator for India and China is the recent reported deployment of Chinese J-20 stealth fighters near the line of actual control. This is a clear signal of competitive deterrence and force readiness. In response, we're seeing India deepen its defense cooperation and balancing alliances with the United States. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's role in this theater is primarily acting as a source of insurgent spillover rather than acting as a conventional state threat.
And complicating all of this state-level diplomacy is the constant presence of violent non-state actors. We're actively monitoring established groups like the TTP, LET, GEM, ISKP, and various Baloch insurgent formations. These groups act as severe destabilizing forces, which means that even if the state actors successfully avoid open war, the region remains incredibly volatile and vulnerable to proxy violence.
Turning now to Section 4, Southeast Asia Stability, Internal Strife, and Maritime Coercion.
In Southeast Asia, the geopolitical landscape is truly dominated by 2 distinct flashpoints right now. First, you have the severe, ongoing civil conflict inside Myanmar. And second, there's the persistent gray zone maritime friction happening externally in the South China Sea.
Now, these dual pressures are happening at the same time, but they look very different. Internally, reports show Myanmar's junta escalating its targeting of civilians, using airstrikes that are creating massive humanitarian spillover across its borders. Externally, we're seeing recurring China-Philippines gray zone clashes in the West Philippine Sea. Things like the use of water cannons and batons, which constantly test regional alliance commitments.
And local decision-makers are grappling with even more security pressures on top of that. In southern Thailand, recent insurgent attacks linked to the BRN have resulted in casualties. Over in the Philippines, security forces are dealing with communist rebel clashes and arresting terrorist bomb makers. Plus, you have transnational scam economies operating almost like parallel states, which heavily erodes local authority.
All of this points to a pretty stark diplomatic reality. As one prevailing assessment put it, ASEAN appears unable to compel behavioral change from the junta, weakening regional deterrence and political cohesion. Analysts are noting that current regional mechanisms are struggling to exert leverage here, and because of that, these destabilizing actions are starting to normalize without a decisive crisis management response. Finally, Section 5, Strategic Outlook and Action, What to Watch. When we take a macro view across all four of these Asian theaters, a very clear pattern of behavior emerges for the near term. The immediate threat of full-scale conventional war remains low across the board. But what we absolutely need to watch for is deliberate, below-threshold pressure. That means continued maritime blockade rehearsals near Taiwan, North Korea's sustained material support to external conflicts, localized militant proxy violence in South Asia, and prolonged gray zone maritime clashes in Southeast Asia. Which leaves us with this final, critical thought. In an era where gray zone tactics essentially replace open warfare, how resilient are regional alliances against sustained, localized coercion? As these flashpoints continue to develop, the real test is whether existing diplomatic frameworks can adapt fast enough to deter this constant, below-threshold pressure. To dive deeper into these intelligence assessments and hear our full 2-week analysis, please follow the link in this post to listen to the Stylo News Intel Update Morning Podcast on your favorite channel. And be sure to visit www.stylonews.com to subscribe for AI-powered news on demand. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and have a safe, informed day.